Hey y'all, it's me, Dree. So right away, I don't think these 3 emotion cards are 3 separate messages. I think that they're showing us a timeline, really. It starts with determination. So the collective has their sights set on something. They're investing energy. They're showing up consistently. They are convinced this is where they're supposed to be headed. And then, with silence, nothing. Everything goes still. Not because they quit. Not because they failed. But I'm getting simply because time passes. And the emotional intensity that originally fueled this determination, well, after a while, that naturally begins to settle. Right? The chase, that loses momentum. The urgency, that softens. And eventually, this is what you get. Silence. I don't think this silence is something the collective chose. I think it's something they arrived at. Almost like, well, now what? I'm not getting that this pursuit is consuming every waking thought anymore, though. Because when life gets quiet, well, the quiet, that creates space, right? Space to observe, space to feel, space to see what constant movement was preventing the collective from seeing in the first place. And then after the silence, we see disappointment. I don't think this card is saying the collective is disappointed because they didn't get what they want. No. I think the collective is disappointed because they're finally seeing what it was that they were actually chasing. Because this silence, that removes the emotional momentum. And once momentum disappears, well, reality becomes much easier to see, doesn't it? So I'm getting the disappointment isn't necessarily the outcome, it's the realization. This is a realization that says, I don't think this was what I thought it was, or maybe I don't think this was ever capable of becoming what I imagined it was. And that's a very different kind of disappointment. It's not grief over losing something. It's grief over correcting the story you had been telling yourself all along. I think that's why silence came out in the middle, because, well, silence is what exposes distortion. When we're determined, we're moving. When we're silent, we're observing. And observation, well, observation changes everything, doesn't it? So before we even touch this tarot, these oracle cards, have already established the emotional progression of this whole story. Determination becomes silence, which ultimately produces disappointment. Not because the collective failed, but because enough time has passed for reality to become clearer than the story they were once committed to believing. That's different. Now let's get into this tarot. So we start in this determination. I have the Knight of Swords reverse, the Four of Swords, and the Queen of Wands reverse. So immediately we're introduced to this Knight of Swords reversed. This is a person who shows up as impulsive, hurtful, out of control. This is someone whose actions ultimately create a missed opportunity. And then the energy shifts because we arrive at the Four of Swords. I'm getting that this is the collective, and I don't think the collective chose this silence, like I said at the beginning. I think they were pushed into it. This card says isolation, and I think that's how the collective was left. In isolation. They were forced to go within. They were forced to heal. They were no longer participating in what unfolded afterwards. This is a non-action card. And then we get the Queen of Wands reversed. So I don't think this queen suddenly became reversed. I think this knight assigned the queen this identity. I think this is the collective. So I'm getting that the collective was put into isolation, and immediately they're being viewed as temperamental, demanding. This is my way or the highway kind of energy. This is someone who is strong-willed. This could very easily be the difficult one. So the sequence here becomes pretty clear. The knight creates the conflict. The knight pushes the collective into isolation. And while the collective is isolated, a new narrative begins forming about who they are. Well, that makes this disappointment much deeper than how I started, because I'm getting that while the collective was healing from this hurtful, sarcastic, rude, missed opportunity, somebody else was defining who they were. That doesn't sound right. Let's move into this second column. We've got silence. And obviously this card is just doubling down on what we just saw. The collective isn't speaking. The collective is in Four of Swords energy against their will. They're isolated, which has brought them to healing, which has brought them to going within. The collective is no longer participating in whatever unfolded. And then we get the tarot, which starts with the Two of Swords reverse, Justice reverse, and then the 3 of coins. So this 2 of swords reverse immediately catches my attention, because this isn't talking about indecision. This is talking about a clear warning. This card says, attention, red flags, stop, do not cross, a clear warning. So the question becomes, who is issuing this warning? Because the collective, we just confirmed they're already in silence, right? And there are only 2 people established in this story up until now, right? So that means the only active voice left here is this insincere, out of control Knight of Swords reversed. So they must be the one putting out the warning. Then we move into Justice reverse. I don't think it's an accident that this deck of cards emphasize the words that it does, because this card says being shamed and blamed, victimization, unfair, karmic avoidance. And this does feel karmic to me, because the situation is feeling like kind of a big deal. This card doesn't feel like justice is being served. This card feels like a narrative being created about the collective. And that's terrible, because the collective has been not in any of these cards so far, except for silence. And then we arrive at this 3 of coins, and this is about doing it together, collaboration, synergy, and team energy. So I'm getting the warning. This warning, it doesn't remain with one person. It enters a collaborative environment. This could be a group, a workplace, a community. It could be all of those. And what I'm getting is that while the collective remains silent, the Knight remained active. The Knight creates the conflict in the first problem, and that left the collective isolated because of it. So it's very clear that the collective is absent. And the Knight begins warning other people. A warning of guilt and blame that becomes something that is actively reinforced through a group of people. And there's a real tragedy in this center column, because I'm getting the most, or noticing the most, that the collective isn't present to defend themselves at all. The collective is in silence. Meanwhile, their identity is being shaped by someone else's version of the story. Someone else who acted as the bully and left the collective in a hurtful way. And I'm getting that's exactly why we were moving towards disappointment in the first place, because I'm getting that the collective, in their silence, they eventually realize that they weren't simply left behind, but they were being spoken about while they were gone. From the very start, And then that takes us to our third column, which ends in the disappointment. After everything we've just uncovered, I think this disappointment is over finally understanding why all of this happened in the first place. Because with the tarot, we've got the 10 of Wands, the 8 of Swords, the 6 of Cups. So this is a heavy load. This is overwhelmed. This is at the breaking point. I don't feel this energy belongs to the collective. I think this energy belongs to the Knight. Because we've been following the Knight's actions since the very beginning of this reading. Something was weighing heavily on this person. Something had become too much for them to carry. And the 8 of Swords. This is self-entrapment, negative thoughts. This is paralyzed. This is crisis. So now the burden begins making sense. This wasn't simply stress the Knight was feeling. This was something that became a crisis inside the Knight's mind. Whatever story they were telling themselves, it trapped them in their heads. It convinced them they had to react from fear instead of truth. And I'm getting, when somebody reaches that kind of level of fear, well, they stop responding to what is actually happening, and instead they begin responding to what they believe might happen. This is most definitely a card of paranoia. And I think that matters here. Because then the whole reading ends on the 6 of Cups, and this card is very important. Everything about this card is important, including the image on this card. Because this card softens the whole reading. I'm getting that after everything we've witnessed, the focal point of this paranoia, this crisis that this Knight has created in his head, this is about innocence, tenderness. This is connection. And I'm getting very specifically here that this is child energy, which tells me that whatever narrative was built around the collective, it wasn't being driven by who the collective actually was. No. It was being driven by this Knight's internal crisis surrounding an innocent child or children. This Knight was carrying such a heavy burden that it turned to fear. And the fear became self-entrapment. And that self-entrapment distorted the way they viewed these children and the collective. So I don't know. When I take a step back and I look at this entire spread, this disappointment, it becomes much deeper Because nowhere in this reading have we actually been shown who the collective truly is. All we've been shown is the version of the collective that emerged through the Knight's fear, the Knight's warning, the Knight's shame and blame, and all the collaboration that followed it. The tragedy isn't simply that an opportunity was missed here. The tragedy is that a genuine, tender, innocent child and their parent became filtered through an insincere and out of control, impulsive person and their crisis about these kids. Nothing here about the collective. So I'm getting, once all this happened, everything around this Knight became a reaction to the Knight's fear instead of a response to the actual truth. And that's really sad because of the people this ultimately impacted. No child deserves to be left in a out of control missed opportunity that presents as rude, sarcastic. Who would treat a child like that? Who would treat their parent like that? And what could this person be so paranoid that he needed to push the collective into this identity and smack into silence so that they could twist the whole narrative up? Who does that? Collective, I know you're disappointed. This feels disappointing. What's the most disappointing is not only did this affect these children, but this affected the collective's collaborative space. And who does this Knight think that they are? Wow. I'm going to have to just leave this energy here because I am baffled. This is a real tragedy. And I don't even know how you come back from this. I've never been this taken aback by a reading before. So I'm going to have to leave this energy where it is. It doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel right. It feels like a correction must take place. If this is your message, if this one resonated with you, then let me know in the comments. What do you do after this silence? What do you do after you realize the disappointment? I guess the only thing left to do is to get back into this determination. This Knight needs consequences. And I'm getting it's just a matter of time because justice came out reversed. And what goes around comes around. This person has real karmic retribution coming their way, collective. And if I were you, I would just keep focusing on you and let this karma ride out. And as for these people, they must have never really known you to begin with for them to go off the high end with an impulsive, out of control night in the first place. My guess collective is you and your children. Y'all are better off without this. Any of this in your reality. Remember, where there is love, there is light. And I'm sending my love to you, collective. I know that justice will set in and do its job here because I said it, this situation, it's karmic. There is no other way around it. I'll catch you guys in the next one.